There's a lot going on with our senses that is very important. We just don't recognize because of the culture we're in. We're not trained to recognize it. So, to begin with a little bit of this, we'll look at your memory. Memory can be very useful in tracking. So it sets up the parameters as we work with our memory to be able to get a sense of time and place. So if you think back to a time when you were at your front door, and you look at that, you look at the entryway, you look at the door. There's probably certain sounds that you're familiar with that might be associated with the front door, the area around your house that the front door occupies. There might be certain smells, particularly at this time of year of winter. If you're in a wet climate, there might be smells associated with wetness that may be available to you at your entryway. There may be certain sounds associated with approaching your doorway. There's the feel of the key, the feel of the doorknob, the sound it makes. So if you can remember certain things like that, that lets you know that you have some ability to track your own past. And a simple event is approaching your front door, unlocking it, turning the doorknob, opening the door, walking through the doorway, closing the door. So there's visual components for that, auditory, there's feelings, there may be smells. This time of year, oftentimes when we walk into the house, there might be the smell of food, baked goods, potpourri. So getting a sense of what senses you're using when you look at your own memories. How visual were you? What kind of sounds did you remember hearing? What kind of smells did you remember smelling? And what do you remember now thinking back to when you thought back to your front door? So coming to your senses. What senses seem to be more prevalent at this moment? How many of you can imagine what an orange looks like? How many of you can imagine the texture of an orange, the weight of an orange? The smell of an orange. The smell of the orange when you break its skin and start to peel it. What it looks like. The subtle sounds of peeling the orange. The sound of moisture. So simply working with your own memory, you can start to get a sense of this practice called tracking. Because you can remember, even back in the past, when you entered a room and the feel that was in the room. If there was an argument recently in that room, you could still feel the energy of the argument. You could sense the conflict in the air, in the energy of the room, in the atmosphere of the room. And sometimes you can even get a sense of what the argument was about. That's an aspect of tracking. So we use tracking all the time. When we first meet someone and we get these impressions, we're getting a sense of that person. Maybe not a total sense. Maybe a sense of what they were doing recently. Maybe they were in a conflict recently and we meet them and they're still in that conflicted state. And so they come off kind of harsh to us. So we don't always know all the details of what we sense. Which is why when we're tracking, we keep tracking. We stay with a particular set of information that we're getting. And we keep asking ourselves and our guides questions to clarify what we're picking up. We don't take anything at face value, per se. We get what we get, and in that moment, we start the inquiry process. We question what we're picking up to get more details so that we can get more accurate information.
Bless you.
So that being said, what are these psychic abilities that we hear about? The clairvoyance and clairaudience and the other clair abilities. Well, you're going to hear a lot of things about this, and I'm going to simplify it all. Let's just look at, we have 5 senses. Sight, hearing, smell, taste, touch. And let's say, for instance, that there are scientifically quantifiable aspects of those 5 senses. And let's say that there are aspects of the 5 senses that are more otherworldly. They're not as easily quantifiable. If we start looking at our psychic abilities as the other side of our 5 senses, that's going to make it a lot easier for us to start becoming more attuned. If we start to recognize, okay, so I have images that aren't necessarily external. So whereas I can see the walls of the house and the ceiling fan, and that seems to be outside of me, when I think of my front door and the doorknob and the entryway, that's certainly outside of me, but when I think about it, it appears kind of in my head. And sometimes I can imagine the same image that's inside my head. I can imagine it where it actually is in space-time, over at my property. And so there's an aspect of remote viewing. It may not fully move into remote viewing because right now it's just a remembered image, but it's a remembered image at the location. And if I were to really work at that, then I could use that remembered image to get a current image, real-time image, real-time experience of what's happening at my front door. And at the beginning stages, a lot of that would be vague sensations and impressions and not knowing how accurate it is. So that if we really start to understand that our psychic abilities are just these largely intangible impressions that we get from all of our senses. Because you can remember a time when you were walking on wet sand and squishing it up between your toes. And you can remember what that sensation's like. You might not be able to easily feel it actually in your feet, but with some practice, you could start to approximate that sensation actually with your feet. So exploring your five senses. One of the first stages in the work is paying attention to the five senses as they present themselves in your day-to-day life. So you might choose a day of the week that you're going to really focus on looking at things and really be visual and get a sense of what you notice as you're visual that day. And then the next day you choose a different sense. And you just keep rotating through your five senses and really exploring the more quantifiable aspects of, say, sounds. And you're just really focusing on everything you hear that day and all the permutations of the things you hear. And at some point you'll start to pick up what's going on with how certain sounds make you feel, what certain images come to you when you hear certain things, what certain sounds, if you hear an oven door and the racks of the oven moving, does that remind you of certain cakes or pies or cookies? And does that bring up a smell of pies, cakes, or cookies? So as you explore just your basic five senses, it's going to really open and allow more of your esoteric senses to awaken. And that's really the basic, that's the foundation for tracking. It's the foundation for awakening your intuition and your instinct, and allowing your intuitional nature, your instinctual nature, to blend and merge in such a way that they can blend and merge with your emotional intelligence and your mental intelligence. Allowing these intelligences and these intuitions and these instincts to blend and merge in such a way that you generally have greater awareness and more attentiveness. And so as we continue that kind of practice, we are going to get more in tune with our instinctual nature, which is somewhat primal in its connection to our intuition and our intellect. We're also going to get more in tune with our intuition, which oftentimes has a better connection to our higher spiritual aspects of ourselves. So when we get our instinct and our intuition working together, and our emotional intelligence and our mental intelligence working together, we get all four of those working together with all five of our senses, then we're going to be fairly skilled at knowing what's going on within us and around us, and we'll have better skill at discovering what's going on with other people. When someone comes and is interacting with us, we'll have greater and greater senses of what's going on, and so we'll be better skilled at knowing for ourselves how to interact with them in a way that is healthful and useful for them as well as for us. So does that start to approach giving a nice foundation for tracking and how it intersects with our psychic abilities and how it all starts to work together?
Can you tie it in more with this intuition thing? I know that we have different impressions. You mentioned the five senses, and how that there's an otherworldly aspect of that. How does that help us be more intuitive, be more in tune with what's going on?
Well, if we're paying attention to our five senses, we're going to notice that we're getting guidance from the intuitional aspects of our five senses all the time. We're always getting impressions, we're always seeing certain things that we wouldn't normally pay attention to. So if we're paying attention to, say, our vision that day, we're going to get more, we're going to have more instinctual insights, we're going to have more intuitional insights. We might even start to see some of the otherworldly aspects that are going, or that are ongoing around us all the time, because we're paying attention, because we're focused on the visual. Same as if we focus on any of the other five senses. If we're really focused on touch that day and we're really aware of every footstep, and you start becoming very aware of air currents as we walk, and we become very aware of differentiating between heat and cold as we move, not only perhaps in our body but also the atmosphere. You know, when we walk through a sunny area, we'll be more attuned to the temperature change. So just getting very oriented within the physical aspects of our five senses are going to open up the non-physical aspects of our five senses. Yes.
So, would you speak to claircognition? Is that the God particle in us all?
Well, to cognate something is to understand. It's to be able to put the pieces together and and come out with something that we can talk about, describe, etc. Whether that's a God particle or not, that's
Because it's not really part of the five senses.
how could it not be?
Well, because it's not based on anything tactile, and it's not based on using those, the taste, the smell. It's not based on those. It's an immediate knowing. There's no reasoning involved. There's no logical deduction. It's there. You know a thing.
Yeah, that's the general idea. I disagree.
Okay. Those are just
Yeah.
words that have been
Yeah,
associated with it.
yeah, it's very common, and I don't think that there's anything within us that's disconnected from anything else.
No, I didn't say disconnected. I just said that you were explaining the five senses.
Yeah.
And this is beyond that because it's not one of those, right?
I think that
I mean, you can use all those, but I'm saying,
I think clear cognition is an outgrowth of being able to synthesize all of the input from the physical aspects of the senses and the non-physical aspects of the five senses. I think the clear cognition is the ability to gather all of that information,
that's a nice
whether
phrase.
we're aware of it or not, and put that together using even higher aspects of our senses.
Mhm.
So I think it all works together.
Yeah.
I know that the common idea is that it's something distinct and separate and not so interconnected with the five senses. I don't think that there's anything in us that's not all interconnected. I do think that our ability to take information and assemble it, I think there's an aspect of just basic cognition that's involved. There's the higher cognition that's evolved, and there's higher aspects of that cognition which is involved. But it seems, because we tend to be so unaware of the connections, that it seems like it's something beyond. But it's just a seeming. I don't think that it's necessarily beyond the five senses as most people describe it. I think it's in part supported by our lower senses, whatever lower is, and I think it's just this integration. So this cognition that seems to be beyond any reasoning, beyond any ability to pinpoint where it comes from. Well, it comes from us. And it comes from an aspect of us that we're not normally accessing and working with at a conscious level.
Right.
I think that as we grow in our awareness as a species, we're going to be functioning more and more from those internal points of views. We'll be less externally oriented,
Right.
like we are with the five senses.
I think one of my teachers, White Eagle, explains it as the sixth and the seventh senses, which we're now merging into using.
Yeah.
So we call them additional senses.
Yeah, I've had teachers describe it that way, and even describe that we had loads of senses, and I'm like,
Yeah, I know.
you know,
Stop counting.
why do we need all of, you know,
Layers.
let's just deal with the five senses. Because, frankly, we haven't tapped 1/10 of what we can do visually. And we're looking for a sixth and a seventh and One of my teachers said there's 21 senses. You know, like, why do we need all that? We might not need 21 different senses.
If you have them, use them.
And if they're just an intellectual hypotheses, why do all that intellectual dividing?
Matter of interpretation, maybe.
Yeah. And whose interpretation is better than others? I'm certainly not saying my assertion, you know, why do we need to quantify, you know, one of my teachers says there's, you know, over 7,000 senses. And the human is going to evolve to master all of those. And I said, what's the point? We haven't mastered the 5 we have. And she's like, well, you do have a point.
Yeah.
And I said, how are we going to master, you know, 7,000 or so senses when we haven't even mastered the 5 basic ones that we stumble around with? So why are we constantly, why are spiritual people, or even so-called spiritual people, constantly looking to relabel, reorganize, create systems and all this stuff, and all these divisions and layers of it? It's like, what are you doing? Okay, yes, I know you have to come up with your own way of talking about it so you know, can market it. But come on, at some point we have to recognize that all these divisions are divisions in the mind. They're intellectual divisions. Most of them aren't real. You know, it's like, well, you know, intuition is better than instinct. And I go, okay, so how is that? Well, intuition is a higher sense. And I go, higher than instinct? Yeah, instinct is that base animal stuff. We're humans. We're not animals. And I go, we're not? How are we not animals? Well, we have a culture and a society, we have language. And I go, okay. What about bees?
That's why some people hang out in the reptilian brain.
Yes.
Well,
Which
I
we should.
always thought my mother was a mammal.
In the South, she'd be a mammal.
Yeah, she was.
So, you know, as you explore your psychic abilities, you know, you can subscribe to any viewpoint you want, really. Whatever is going to work for you. My approach is, let's simplify this stuff. We look at certain Western traditions. You know, some of the work. You know, you've got 32 layers to the energy field. There's another system that says we have 72 layers to the energy field. Well, when I'm working with a client, you know, the client wants to get the work done. If I'm going, okay, I have to look at all 72 layers to clear this out, well, that's going to take a long time. Are there 72 layers? You know, there are as many layers as you decide there are, to as many levels as you decide there are. Because, you know what? The reality matrix is going to shift to accommodate your viewpoints. It's going to shift to accommodate your viewpoints. So do you want a complicated system of viewpoints that you operate through? Or do you want something more simple? More easily accessible not only to you, but to anyone you try to talk to? It's really going to boil down to that. So I hope it's starting to make some sense. And if I burst some bubbles, if I created some controversy, that's okay. Because any of the bubbles burst or bubbles that you were holding, it's in your reality matrix. Any controversy I'm creating, that's also within you. It's your controversy. Because quite frankly, I don't give a hoot what model you subscribe to. As long as you're able to be accurate and not fanciful.
I have a question. So each one of us, we
Wonderful.
see according to all of our experiences and our biases and those types of things. So I'm wondering, when tracking, does that have the capability of affecting what we see, or how do we avoid that?
If we let it, yes. Talked about this last class, about the importance of recognizing that we are meaning-making machines. We're constantly making meaning of everything. And we also pointed out the dangers of that.
What is that, Alan? Is that just, what is that?
We're hardwired to make meaning.
Out of everything.
We want things to make sense and follow our line of reasoning. So it has to mean something according to our filters.
Well, I figure I must be doing something right whenever my meanings change meaning. Yeah, because.
It doesn't mean the same
Yeah,
anymore.
thank God.
What does that mean?
So in the context of tracking and what you're talking about, when, can I use you as an example for a moment?
You can always use me as an example.
Okay. And I will still ask.
You can always ask.
She has had a tendency to, in the past, when she looks at a client, she looks for past clients to reference the current client and then make decisions upon how she's going to approach treatment. And there are times when that doesn't work. There are times it hasn't worked. So the problem with making meaning in this way is we are looking at a current situation, referencing the past, bringing past decisions and ideas about what we did and what we saw, and putting it on top of the current situation, the current client.
Mm-hmm.
And we're just seeing the past clients. We're not seeing the actual client. That is dangerous in any line of client-oriented work. It's especially dangerous when you think about the idea that you're not even addressing the client at that point. You're addressing someone else entirely, and what then are you tracking? And what then are you creating in the energy field of your client? Because you're holding that stuff firmly as that person. You're installing stuff, potentially. So part of tracking is being very clear that you are current time with your client. even if you're looking at the client's past, you need to stay with that client. You need to have yourself in the now. Recognize that the client you're looking at is in the now. What you're looking at with the client's stuff may be in the past. So there's this orientation in time that is required with tracking. How are you orienting in time? Are you able to maintain your orientation in time as you work with these other times at the same time? Tracking is not easy. Not by any stretch of the imagination. And if you're making meanings, if you're seeing something with a client and you're referencing past clients or your own past and saying, oh, well that must be what's going on, you're no longer orienting in time properly. You're oriented in your own past and your previous client's past, which is also your past at this point. So you're really referencing you. You're not focused on the client. You're focused on you. Well, you're not the one, well, in this case, you're now the one with the problem. But you're not the one that came to your office with the problem. And if you are the one with the problem, in addition, then you need to get out of that. Which is why we do so much training in learning to establish space and time within ourselves and hold that space and time for our client so that we are oriented in time properly. So that when we are tracking across time and looking at time streams and these diverse energies and the establishment of certain negative momentums and how to put a stop to them and dissolve that momentum, we need to be very focused, very aware of how we are orienting in time. Because if we're not, our accuracy rating goes down. And in the world of the shaman, accuracy is paramount. We have to be accurate. That's why the emphasis in shamanism is healing the self first. Because if we have emotional baggage and that baggage is up and we have a client and the client needs help clearing something out and it's stuff we haven't cleared out, our stuff that hasn't cleared out is going to resonate with what the client needs help clearing out. Our stuff's going to be active, their stuff's active, and we're not going to be very effective. So does that start to answer your question?
Mm-hmm.
Any other thoughts or questions?
Yeah, so the accuracy of tracking then, I mean, right now we can feel the seats, where we're sitting and the air around us. Though the memories that Lee was just bringing up, if there's too much of that in the way of us actually being here in current time, then we are not going to track accurately, is how I'm hearing it.
Exactly. Exactly, because our own memories, our own thoughts, on sometimes our own stuff, our own issues, are up and floating around in the energy field and will confuse us, will distract us.
Well, it seems like the whole medical field then is a farce.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you for saying that before I had to.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I was thinking about the whole medical field and how it uses the herd method.
Yes.
That everybody, okay, there's a cow, here's a cow, there, all the cows, we're gonna do this, and everybody's the same.
Mm-hmm.
They treat everybody that goes through there the same.
It took me quite a while to get my mother to feel comfortable with the idea that doctors were her employees and that she could fire and hire
Mhm.
accordingly.
That's a good
That's
point.
true.
You know, and there was one day there was a mammographer that she felt disrespected by. And she came out in a huff and said, "Let's go." And I go, "What's going on?" She tells me about how rude the person was, and I said, "Cool. Let's go complain. Let's lodge a complaint, and so that maybe this doesn't happen again, and maybe it won't happen again to you if you see this person again." "Oh no, I can't do that." And I go, "Well, okay, I can do that." "No, you can't do that." "No, I don't. I want you doing that." And I go, "Okay, well." So I opened the magazine I was reading, and she goes, "Are we going to go?" And I go, I close the magazine and go, "No, we have a task. We have to lodge a complaint about this person that was disrespectful." She goes, "I can't do that." And I go, "Well, I can't leave until it's done." She goes, "You're really going to make me do this?" And I go, "It needs to be done. You can't live your life being mistreated by people who they see you, they get your money. You know, you're paying, this. They are your employees. You cannot allow your employees to treat you like that."
Or anyone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I said, "I'll go with you." So we went up there and asked how the, complaint procedure happens, and we did that, and we had to do that a few times with different doctors, and then she got the idea that she did not have to feel horrible when she goes to see these people. She doesn't have to feel horrible after she sees them. She doesn't have to be scared to go get treatment. And now when she goes in to see a doctor, if the doctor isn't interacting with her, she'll say, "Excuse me, do you have other patients today?" And the doctor, "Oh yeah, I have a full docket." And she goes, "Okay, well, I appreciate that, and right now I'm your patient. I would like your time since you have mine."
Your mom
Good
said
for
that?
her.
Mom said that.
Good for
the last
her.
the last doctor she was with
Good for her.
that was not paying any attention to her.
Good for her.
So, it's not about being rude back to these people. It's about just letting them know, hey, you're getting $215 for this 15-minute visit. I want to get some value out of this. So you're going to explain what's going on. You're going to talk to me. And when we go to some spiritual healer, we are entitled to the same respect. They need to interact with us and talk to us and be present. And from, within the shaman tradition, there needs to be accuracy. And if the shaman is approaching you from this herd mentality, then they're not very well trained. And if that's controversial, good. Because I'll tell you flat out whether you're well trained or not. And I'm not as well trained yet as I need to be, which is why I'm still training with my teachers. Any other thoughts, comments?
How does one get more and more accurate? Especially in tracking.
Looking at themselves. Being more aware of themselves. More aware of their issues. and learning how to clear those issues out of their energy fields. Because the less stuff we ourselves have, the less likely we are to be distracted by ourselves. Yes.
This just happened yesterday. Well, it's been going on for a few days prior. Justin, my oldest, was over because my car was causing problems, and he was able to detach that plastic piece.
Mm-hmm.
And so him and Kim stayed, and we did some stuff, and we went back to me going back again to, I have 2 more years left, it's 2 years left in that house, but I'm going through all this trauma and pattern stuff that happened when Tino died in November, and all the friction we had with his family. It's like, you gotta get out of that house. And I didn't realize, because it was surfacing, in the middle of the night, I wake up, I go, what is this? And I'm trying to do stuff for it to go away, but it keeps coming up, and I get worried and go into fear. And then I said, Justin, didn't I just go over this last year? He goes, yes. So he puts up a spreadsheet and puts out what I make, and because we're trying to guesstimate how much rent I can pay, because I don't even pay rent. And I'm barely making it, I'm not paying rent, so how am I gonna do it when I'm paying rent? And so then I realized, I go, this is triggers again. The time of year, triggers. So it took me a while to track it. And then I realized, I go, okay, and then he put it on paper, which helped get it out so I could see it on paper.
Mm-hmm.
That's what that was. Triggers. So that was tracking back.
Mm-hmm.
Every time about this year, that stuff keeps surfacing. With his family. So.
Which is why I encourage us to have someone in our life who can just hold the space, no judgment, so that we can empty out. So that we can get stuff out of us so that we can then look at it. And I encourage writing stuff down, getting journals and writing stuff down, or even getting, like, I don't know, Dr. Phil probably has workbooks with questions that you could answer, or something, getting stuff out, having a way to get stuff out so you can look at it, perceive it, sense it, feel it differently than what you're doing inside. Because if you're just doing it inside, that's a hard, long road to travel and get anywhere. So you need someone that you can empty out to. And you also need a certain amount of journaling. Some people, I think, go crazy with the journaling and have Library of Congress of journals in their house. And we're like, wow, that's a lot of journaling. But yeah, just enough so it's outside of you a bit, and you're able to get a little distance.
So I felt all this dis-ease and what, restless, irritable, discontent. And it took me a while to figure it out until I had said to Justin, yes, Mom, we did go through this last year. And so at least I was able to track back.
And again, that's another aspect of your visual. You needed to see it.
Mm-hmm.
So you could start working with your other senses with it. Because for you, in that context at least, you couldn't really get anywhere until you could see it. And you couldn't see it while it was inside.
Yeah.
So that's another thing I'm talking about. Really learn to work with just your 5 basic ones. That will open up the other side of those 5. And then once you got both halves of those, quote unquote, if there's, 2 sides, your visual system is going to become more well-rounded, more full. So all of your senses, once all of your senses are focused, are able to work in this, in all dimensions, boom, 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 there you go. You're going to be extremely aware.
And then that piece fell off your car.
Yeah.
Too.
Yeah.
Huh.
You got trapped at home.
So it's when we, it's when we have our senses, and we're interacting, our relationship to our senses are very limited. Once we start unlimiting our senses, and our senses are fully functional, whatever that means, and whenever that happens. But as they become more and more and more and more functional, as our senses grow in their scope, it's like our senses become gyroscopic. From a clairaudient point of view, the ability to translate other languages without necessarily having learned that language. I know a lady that can do that. I'm like, that's a cool aspect of hearing, to have been able to unlock or tap into or unleash, however we want to language that. That's cool.
She wasn't a linguist or something from another time?
Oh, quite possibly. Yeah. I mean,
But in hypnotherapy, people that say speak only one particular language, when you take them down, they'll end
Mhm.
up speaking in other languages.
exactly. Yeah. So they're able to go into trance and tap into these, these other aspects of their senses.
Yeah.
Which is why I say, really study your own five senses, and that's a lifelong study in itself.
Yeah.
Let alone trying to master 21 senses.
My son-in-law speaks Korean when he's asleep. But his mother's Korean, but he doesn't speak the language. He speaks it when he's asleep. And he speaks perfect Korean when he's asleep.
I thought you were going to say Klingon.
Oh, that too. No, that's what he speaks when he's awake.
So just simplify it for yourself, and really work with your five basic senses, and you'll discover what I call the other side of your five senses, which are you'll start noticing the psychic abilities that you have that are readily available to you. And then as you start exploring those psychic abilities that are readily available to you, other psychic abilities that are associated with your senses will start coming online. So really just simplify it for yourself. Because if you try to think in terms of so many of the psychic development models that are out there, they speak in such strange, they use a lot of foreign terms that you might not be familiar with. And it's not important to speak in foreign terms. It can sound exotic. But exotic isn't always useful. Sometimes just simplify it. Work with your five senses to start. The other aspects of your senses will open up. You'll become more aware of that. You'll start to recognize what aspect of this seems to be intuition, and what part of it seems to be more primal instinct. You'll start noticing which of it has more of an association to an emotional intelligence, and which aspect of it seems to have more connection to a mental intelligence. So you'll start to recognize this just working with your basic five senses. And then, of course, if you want to further that stuff, then there are, we have specific practices that help develop that. There's lots of intuitive games. Patricia has a lot of those intuitive games which really develop our senses and open up our willingness to work with things that aren't quite so normal. Yeah, it can be a lot of fun. Yeah. Any other thoughts, comments?
I have a question.
Okay.
When you are tracking, how do you know whether it's a parallel life or a past life? You personally, do you see a difference?
Yes. So the beginning is I was trained to ask. When we ask for something, for instance, if I ask if I have a suspicion based on the client's description of what's going on that there's something going on, I will ask their energy field specifically to show me that. And since, again, the space is clean and clear, when I ask to perceive something, if it's there, that's what I'm going to be able to perceive. If it's not there, it's not going to show up. So if I am tracking to see if something is existing in a parallel life, I ask.
You're asking their energy field, not your team or teachers or guides or whatever? Or both?
Who are you asking?
Okay, so in the basic context, I'm going to be asking the client's energy field.
Okay.
What's going on? When I need clarification, I will ask my team.
Okay.
Because the client's system knows what's going on
Okay.
better than anybody.
And you'll sense a hit from that.
Exactly.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you'll get, like Patricia talks about, that intuitive hit.
And then we'll all perceive that sensory-wise differently. Some could be some kind of tactile pressure or tension, or some can be a heat of some kind, or
Yeah.
all
Or
kinds of
knowing.
different ways. Oh, yeah.
And
Yeah.
to know it.
Or just that's
That's it.
that.
Hmm.
Thank you.
You're welcome.